Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have a new episode of Effed Up Stories for you tonight, and it's on a new submission from our good old fan of ours. I mean, we've had a couple stories from her. It's Sheri Lowe. She never ceases to amaze me with her stories because there's always a part in it that I don't expect comes out of left field and kind of gives me an excited shock, like, fuck, I didn't think that was going to happen. So, a really cool story that we're going to tell that she sent in. It started off with that intuitive voice, her own personal guardian angel, but it's way more effed up than that. Before we get into her story, though, if you have an effed up story of your own on the paranormal, or maybe you have a video or some pictures, we'd like to get it. You can send it to us at our official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We'll get it on the website, and we will get it into a podcast because we are covering every submission and getting it into a podcast. Another thing I want to touch on really quick is we said we were going to do near-death experiences this week, and I think we're going to postpone that to next week only because I'm waiting on a possible submission. Someone had said that they were going to send one in to me, and I still haven't gotten it, and I'd like to get it if I could before we cover it. But we do have great stories for you this week anyway, so you can look forward to the near-death experience one next week. So with that having been said, we're going to jump into Sheri's story. On the website, by the way, if you'd like to read it, it's called The Voice, My Guardian Angel. Okay. So, she said the first time she became aware of this voice, and we all have a voice, like maybe you've been somewhere where you knew something bad was going to happen, and you get that inner voice to get out of there. Like you can just tell something bad is going to happen. And sometimes, well, at least for me, I've disobeyed that voice one time, and it ended disastrously. And I never ignored it again. It's always right. You just get that feeling. It's like, that intuition, you listen to it, you have to listen to it. So for Sheri, now hers is a little bit deeper than what I've ever experienced, and I would imagine most people would have experienced. For Sheri, she first became aware of it when she was in grade 3. And she said she had this puppy, and the puppy had ran out onto an ice floe, and the way I would describe ice floe, at least here where I come from, we call them ice pans. And what it is these little discs of ice that are on the water. It's wintertime, obviously, and you got to hop from ice pan to ice pan. She calls them ice floes. So anyway, she saw her dog, and it was out onto this thing, and it was in the South Saskatchewan River. And he was being carried away downstream on one of these ice pans, by the swiftly moving current. And of course, she never even gave it any thought. She just jumped headfirst into this thing, trying to rescue him. So she was jumping ice pan to ice pan to ice pan. And as she was doing this, her brother and 2 cousins were on, I guess, the shoreline or the land part, and they were screaming at her to stop. They were crying and yelling, we can always get a new dog, but it's different with a human. And most people feel that way, although I have to say I love animals, so I don't know. To me, I get it, I guess.
I evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. Depends on who the person is.
Yeah, I'd rather my cat than a lot of people's. So, if we're being honest here. So anyway, for her, that wasn't a discussion. It wasn't something that, she had. It was her dog. She loved her dog. She wanted to save it. So, by the time she actually got out there and she reached her dog, whose name, by the way, is Tuffy, she picked him up. And she immediately realized just the situation that she had gotten herself in. She's in 3rd grade, right? She's young. She's out in these ice pans. And she said her dog felt all of a sudden very heavy to her. She was only 8 years old. And the space between these ice pans, all of a sudden, like, the reality sank in. These are kind of far apart. This is a risky thing that she has to do now. And for a moment, she didn't know how she was going to get back. But then, as clear as day, she's heard this voice in her head. And it just said, "It's okay. Don't worry. Just jump." So she jumped. And as she was jumping flow to flow to flow, before each jump, she heard this voice again say, "Jump." And she crisscrossed the ice floe to ice floe, all the way carrying her dog in her arms. And eventually she makes it back to shore. And she remembered, she just felt special. She described it as feeling like she had wings, like she had some special ability that day. Like she described it as being able to leap like a deer. And she said the voice, now I don't know about you guys, but when I get a voice in my head, it's mine, right? Like I hear, whatever voice I hear, it's in my voice. For her, she said the voice was not her voice. She didn't know whose voice it was. There was something that made it distinctive and separate from herself that made her wonder if there was something more to it. But she was young and she shrugged it off. So then she fast forward in her life, because this is something that she's experienced her whole life. So fast forward now to the next time she heard the voice. At this time, she's 15 years old and she's at this party. And the party she was at, she said she was way too young to attend. She shouldn't have been there. So I'm guessing it was older kids probably smoking, drinking, dope, right? We've all been there. So she said the party starts to get wild, and without warning, she gets this voice just snap into her head again, and it's screaming at her, get out now. And so she left, and right after she left, she said a lot of bad stuff actually happened at that party. She was very lucky to have gotten out of it. So she listened to the voice, and she came out unscathed, as it were. And then the next time she had this happen, it was when she was 22. And I know I'm just saying little stuff here. It's going to get interesting. Just trust me on that. So when she's 22, she runs into this old boyfriend of hers. They kind of remained friends, but all of a sudden, he wants to get back together. He wanted her to leave Saskatchewan, where she lived, and move out to Calgary, Alberta, to live with him. And I guess this was pretty sudden and out of the blue, the way she described it. And it's so much so that initially she thought this was just a joke, right? But as he persisted, she realized that this was genuine. And he said some pretty. She described it as weird. I would too. Especially if it's something that you just kind of bring up. Like he, for example, said, Like, he'd like to be the daddy to her baby, which, by the way, wasn't his. And it was 18 months old. Like, I mean, that's a lot to take on for somebody that you're not even in a relationship with, right? I mean, wouldn't you say, Ryan? I mean, I'll be your kid's father, and like
that's
we're not even going on dates yet. Right?
Yeah, especially for two people who weren't pursuing a relationship, and then just out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, I know they were friends.
We should be together, and I can be the dad to your child, and
we can get pancakes.
Take on all the responsibility of let's create an instant family. That's pretty.
I mean, even people who are the real father don't want to do that most of the time, right? Not that I condone that, but anyway. So I mean, it really caught her off guard, right? And in the beginning, she really had no intentions of doing this. I mean, she didn't really want to move to Alberta and just like throw her life upside down. But this line of pushing from this guy persisted over the course of months, and eventually she said it began to sound like a good idea. So however that happened, so 6 months or so later, she moves to Calgary. But when she went there, it wasn't to live with him right away. She was gonna get a place of her own and just take it how it went, right? And anyway, so she gets there. It's just before her son's second birthday. Now, she makes a little side note here, and what it is in her early teens and early adulthood, she had dabbled in the occult. And she went into a period of time where she believed that she was demonically oppressed. And actually, we did a podcast with her that covered a lot of that material. That's why she doesn't really expand on it here. She just references. So we have another podcast on that if you want to check it out. It was really, really cool. But anyway, getting back to where we were. So she's in Calgary now. Her old boyfriend, the one that had convinced her to move out there, right? He had moved into a old 3-story house, the kind that were common in the 70s. And it was a setup. I see this more and more these days, especially where you get like a couple different people into the same apartment. They all kind of pitch in on rent, and they share the rest of the house, right? And so he began to, pick at her and pester her to come and see his place, see him, around about a week after she had got there. And anyway, she did, and he gave her a tour, and she said it was kind of a cool place. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. So they're standing in the living room area, and that opened up into what was originally the dining room, but, they had made it into like a smaller sitting room. And she's just standing there, taking the tour, just kind of, being there, when this girl walks in from the hallway, smiling. She was in her 20s. She described her as about 5'4", maybe 145 pounds, with shoulder-length, stringy, colorless, ash blonde hair. It was parted in the middle, kind of hippie style. And she wore bell-bottomed, hipster blue jeans pulled over a long-sleeved nylon gymnastic ballet leotard. And she had that unhealthy, she doesn't paint a real good picture. She had this unhealthy, pudgy, pasty pale look common to the uninformed vegetarians of the era, and her eyes were blue. So the girl was unremarkable looking, as she put it. But what was remarkable was when she walked up to her and her ex, and she says, and I quote, "Hey, Sheri, how are you?" Smiling back, Sheri looked at her. She looked at her ex-boyfriend, assuming that he had been talking to her about him. He smiled back, and they looked back to the girl, and she says, "Sheri, I was sent here to warn you to stop doing what you're doing. You are not in the light and not in the dark, and you have opened yourself up to bad things. I know this because it happened to me, and I killed myself." Right? I mean, wow, what the fuck, right? And then she just carried on and walked out of the house. And, Sheri's there in shock, and she asks her ex, like, did she just say that she killed herself? And he just nods like, yeah, right? Like, and then, she asked him who she was. She assumed that he knew her, and he didn't know her. And he said that, he just paid her rent and moved in that day. Like, like nobody knew who she was, and no one ever even saw her again after that. So right there, when I read that part, it was just, kind of like mind blowing, right? Like, oh yeah, by the way, everything you're doing is wrong, and I did it once too, and now I killed myself. Just thought I'd let you know. Now I'm gonna go catch a movie. So that was really weird, right? And so anyway, Sheri took the advice of the strange woman, and she got rid of everything occult related that she had. She just generally stayed away from it. So now we're going to fast forward again. And this is at another time. She was at the age of 24. And she was alone. She fell asleep on the living room couch watching a movie. And she woke up feeling fuzzy-headed. The channel was off the air, just the white noise static. And all the lights were on, and the clock on the wall said 2 a.m. And suddenly she heard someone knocking on her front door. And when she walked over and she looked out, she saw a large man through the glass, but the man was in the dark, so she couldn't really make out any features. And what she did was she opened the inner door, and in this way she could talk to him through the screen section of the storm door without actually making herself vulnerable. And he said, "Sorry for waking you up, but my car broke down on the freeway." And she got a little side note here. The freeway she could actually see from her house. It was across the street and over a chain link fence from where she lived. And she was, or this guy was wondering if he could use her phone to get help. It's one of those tales we hear all the time, right? Is like people ask for help, and really it's a insidious kind of intention behind it. So anyway, she actually started to unlock the door to let this guy in to use the phone. And she wasn't really in her right mind anyway. She'd just woken up. She's kind of groggy. But then suddenly, bang, that voice shrieks again in her ear, "No!" And in a flash, she slammed and locked both doors and said, "No, you can't." And the man stood on the steps for half a minute, and then he walked away. And she ran to the phone. This is in a time where it was all landlines, right? And she was holding the receiver up to her ear with her finger on the dial, getting ready, I guess, to phone for help. And as she stood there, she stood there for a couple of minutes. She was looking out of her living room window. And because she was afraid that, this guy might just be there kind of looking at her. And so what she did was she turned off all the lights so that he couldn't see in. And she went over by the drape. She peeked out and she saw that this guy was in the car, like the stalled car sitting on the shoulder of the freeway across from her house, way over on the adjacent lane. And she noticed that, she could notice movement in the car. And she realized that the guy was sitting at the steering wheel. And he was just sitting there staring at her house for a good 5 to 10 minutes. And, she could make out his profile, and she could see, like, when he'd look away or when he'd look straight ahead. And she could tell, like, this guy was watching her. He was watching her house. And he did this for, like I said, like 5-10 minutes or so, just sitting there. And, she was getting pretty spooked at this. And after, that 5 or 10 minutes, he very easily, I might add, just turned on his car, drove away. So obviously, in this case, her voice was, that's your intuition right there telling you this is a bad thing going to happen. This is a mistake. That guy, no doubt, probably would have kidnapped her. God knows what he would have done. Obviously, he didn't really have car trouble, right? So that's another case with the voice. Now, the next time she heard it, she was 24 and she was at a party with this guy in Barrie, Ontario. And, they had spent the weekend at the lake. It was Sunday. It was the tail end of a long weekend. She was tired. And between the sun and the fresh air and the water skiing and the late nights, she was really exhausted. She could hardly keep her eyes open. And her date were drinking pretty hard all weekend. And, they were feeling like shit, right? I mean, as you do after a good couple nights or something like that. And they were just sitting back against the wall in the living room. And, the kitchen entrance, she said, was to the right of them. And because of this, they could see, what was happening in the kitchen and the living room at the same time. And at this point in time, she said the house was really crowded. There was lots of people that she knew that was at the party, but she was really exhausted. And before she knew it, she falls asleep, right? And her date fell asleep. But then she woke up to that voice that saved her so many times before. And the voice is saying, wake up now. And she got exclamation points shouting like this is very, it's very aggressive this time. And when she did wake up and she looked around, she noticed that she couldn't recognize like anybody at the party anymore. It's like everybody she knew was gone. And now it was just a bunch of, how she described it, mean-looking cowboy-booted dudes that were milling about, okay? And so she was getting kind of panicked at this point. And her date is still asleep. And, her voice is saying, get up now, don't look left, don't look right, just walk straight out. Don't look at anyone, and don't say a word. So she shook her date up, and she told him to do exactly what the voice had told her to do. And she got up, she walked through the kitchen to the back door, never made eye contact with anybody, never spoke to anybody. She followed that voice to the T. And so, we assumed that this was going to go smooth, right? So she gets outside, she's at the door, or I should say her hand's on the door, and then she hears her date say, of course not listening, hey, can anybody call me a cab? Right? Pretty innocent enough anyway. But as soon as he said that, all hell broke loose. And she just summarizes this part. But apparently, and this is something that had happened a couple of times before, what happens is someone puts a roofie into your drink when your friends leave, their friends arrive, and they just beat the shit out of you, right? And that's what had happened here. All the friends had been gone. And there was, she was there and her boyfriend was there. They'd fallen asleep and they wake up and there's basically people there and all they want to do is cause trouble, right? So the people that were still there, the people that she knew and herself and her date or whatever, this group that integrated themselves, the bad guys, they sent a bunch of people in the hospital apparently. And her date ended up getting a few stitches in his lip. Now, Sheri didn't manage to, she managed to avoid it. I guess it's not as common for a woman to get beat on, but yeah, it was bad stuff, right? And apparently what she said is, and this was told to her by a couple of the people that she knew that were left behind, she just went ape shit. And, when they started hitting, and punching her date, she started freaking out in a way where she basically scared them. Okay, so I got to use my imagination here, but I imagine it's pretty must have been pretty impressive to spook a bunch of hard asses. A house full of thugs, as she put it, and anyway, she said it was like she was possessed or she was being controlled by something. But she's sure that if she had just kept walking through that kitchen door, never said it, never went back, and her date never said anything, she would have got away with it. I mean, she almost did before her date opened his mouth, right? And anyway, she knew at the time that turning back was going to be a mistake, but I guess, what choice did she have, right? I mean, if anybody would do that if their date was getting attacked, right? I mean, it's just...
Well, it depends on how good the date was going, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and what kind of person you are, right? I mean, well,
Well, I'm not a very good person, so.
Nah, well, that's why we know and love you, right? He's honest about it. But anyway, I mean, well, actually, I kind of get that because there's some people I dated I really wouldn't care, right? I guess I'm thinking about my wife now. I would never let that happen to my wife, but
Oh no,
I married her,
either.
right? So
Well, exactly. That's why I made that whole lifelong commitment thing.
yeah, that's a depressing way to put it. I mean, it's that whole for life, right? I mean, you might as well just be speaking prison right now. For life. He's a lifer.
You're lucky your wife doesn't watch our show.
Yeah. No, my wife is great. I kid, of course. So anyway, she said, and I'm going back to Sheri now. Her whole outburst where she said she was she felt like she was demonically possessed, like just this strength out of nowhere, craziness that really wasn't in her, came out, allowed her to protect herself and her date. And she said that in retrospect, she feels like she just gave in to the voice, right? It's like she let that take over, and that scares her as well, because she said the people at that party called her a demon, right? So, she's kind of talking to herself here, like, what is this voice? Is it good? Is it bad? And she's not sure. And especially when she considers this next part of the story. So we're jumping to the next part now. And this was the year that, now this doesn't mean anything to me, maybe it does to you guys, but she said, in Saskatchewan, the Rough Riders were destined to win the Grey Cup. So 1998. And everyone in Saskatoon was excited because they were doing great and they hadn't won since 1966. Her friends and herself, they were getting together for a brunch at an Irish pub, and they were going to do this before the semi-final games. So they're sitting at the table. There's about 12 of them, and they were all kind of chatting and laughing, and suddenly she gets this really intense sense of deja vu, right? And she said it was probably the most intense example of deja vu that she's ever gotten and probably will ever get. And she said it started with, you got to imagine there's 12 of these people and they're sitting around this table, right? And she said it started with the person sitting 2 or 3 chairs to her left. And the conversation started to go back and forth in a counterclock direction. And as she knew everything, and I'm not, this is not an exaggeration. It's not she felt she knew everything. She knew everything everyone was going to say before they said it, and they would say it. It's like she knew it before it happened. And the conversation was moving around in this counterclockwise direction, and it was slowly getting to be her turn, right? And just before it was her turn to have her say, and she knew what she was supposed to say, is the thing, right? She knew, this event had already played out in her head. She knows how this is supposed to say. And suddenly the voice says to her, you can say what you were supposed to say, and nothing will change. But if you say something different, your life will change, but you won't know if it's for better or for worse. And she said time just sort of stopped. And she remembers feeling very scared of how that concept made her feel. She said it made her feel sick to her stomach, scared. And she thought about saying something different. What would happen if she said something different? But in the end, she wussed out, and she said exactly what was written in the cards. She said what she was supposed to say. And, she thinks about that experience a lot, and she can't help but wonder what would have happened different. It's just like that back in time idea, right? If you went back in time and you stepped on a bug, or, you made this tiny difference, how big of a change could that make to your future? And that's exactly the predicament that she was in, and I guess why she thinks about it. How would saying something different really change her life? So she thinks about that. And anyway, those examples that she's given there are the most profound moments that she's heard the voice loud and clear. But she admits that there are some that are too private to share, right? And as she puts it, she's had a lot of strange, weird, and frightening things happen in her life. And some people say that she has bad luck, and she got this, I think it's a slang term, a schlaprock. I couldn't pronounce that if someone did it first. But anyway, there's a link to the Urban Dictionary. What it means, hang on, I'm going to open this up. What it means is to carry heavy burdens, one who is said to unlucky or extremely unfortunate. Also, formerly a character on the popular cartoon The Flintstone. Okay, so you got really bad luck, a lot of misfortune. That's what it means.
Schleprock?
Yeah, that's a weird word, right? Yeah.
Sounds Ukrainian or something like that.
Well, that would help me feel a little better about my mispronunciation of it. You know, in Soviet Russia, fortune bad you or right? Anyway, so she has these weird accidents and injuries and just bizarre shit happen to her. But she said, she thinks she has good luck and that someone or something has always been looking out for her. And she attributes that to the voice. And, by all accounts, that's what it sounds like, is that this voice is, has saved her. And I'm going to give you an example because that's a great story. And Sheri has all these different, examples of the voice. I never got a voice, but just to go on that whole intuition, listen to your instincts kind of a thing. When I was in college, and I was living in this small city, really, and I lived in an apartment building at that time, didn't have a lot of money or anything like that. Poor, starving student. And anyway, I was studying or something like that, and my wife was, cooking supper or something, and this knock comes at my door. And when I went and answered it, there's this guy, he must have been like late 40s or early 40s, late 40s, around that age. He was kind of thick, like I don't know if fat's the right word, but he was, bulbous, wearing this dark green winter jacket. He had glasses and a black hat, and he anyway, it was so weird. He was like, come help me. And I was like, what? Right? Like, I don't even know this guy. I was like, come on, I'm moving to bed, come on. And I was just like, dude, like, one, I don't know you. Two, I'm in the middle of something. And it was like the way he talked to me is the way, like, if I went to Ryan's house, I know Ryan, I've known him for 10 years, and I just, bang on the door. I mean, I wouldn't even do that to Ryan, really. I mean, I would set a schedule. I wouldn't just go and expect him to drop whatever he's doing and help me. But
like, hey, come on, as soon as I open the door. But
like, that's the best example that I can give. Or like, if I went to my brother's house, right? I guess I could be open in a way like that. I was like, come on, John, I need your help or something like that, right? But to do that to a stranger is fucked, right?
Way too over familiar.
Yeah, and he's really like, it was like he was antsy, like he really pushy about it, right? And when I was just like, dude, like, I'm not fucking doing it. I don't even know you, like, go away. Like, I'm doing my own shit, right? And he just looked at me. And anyway, when he left, because like he made it sound like he was moving a bed to help, like he was helping someone move a bed into the apartment building. And when I closed the door and I was telling Brittany about this, that's my wife, and I was telling her about this strange fucking thing. And anyway, because of that, and it wasn't a big apartment building. I mean, there was only 2 floors, and he was upstairs, so I would assume that. Anyway, I made a point to watch. I mean, we could see the parking lot. We could see, you could hear anyone in the hallways, whether it was upstairs or downstairs. It really was one of those kinds of places. And that dude never came back. So, my intuition told me not to do it anyway. Not that I guess I need a whole lot of help deciding, but I thought about that after. I mean, fuck, if I had gone out there, he probably would have clubbed me over the head. I would have ended up in the back of a tear-stained van. God only knows, right? And the best way I can describe him, he didn't look exactly like him, but just the stature and the look on him reminded me of the serial killer Dennis Vader. Or was that what, or Radar, or the bind, torture, kill? I'm probably getting them all mixed up. Do you know who I'm talking about? I think his name's Dennis Rader.
You know what? That's strange because I'm pretty up on my serial killers, and that doesn't ring a bell.
I read it all the time. How do I not know this, right? Let me see.
I've read through the A to Z serial killers dictionary like 24 times.
That's what it is. I just Googled it. It's Dennis Rader. Okay. So that's the kind of look. It was a very unassuming, kind of a stout, a stout build, right? And just like very unassuming kind of guy that you'd run into on the street. But there, at the same time, there was this kind of a something behind him, like on his face, like there was like a darkness there, right? You could just sense it. There was something off, right?
Not to mention that through the course of your life, you've drawn nutcases to you like a moth to flame.
Oh God, ain't that the truth? You know, for in some ways it's been interesting, in other ways it's been terrifying, and I don't know what it is about it. Like, I mean, yeah, I'm a little bit strange, right? But not that kind of fucking crazy. You know, I don't hurt animals or people, or right? Like, I don't get enjoyment out of it. I don't, I like paranormal stuff. I like weird stuff in that way, but I don't know. But yeah, I attract really, really strange people to me. So anyway, that is my little example of that. I'm sure everybody's got them. And that's Sheri's story, the voice, and interesting again, like it wasn't her voice. For me, it's my voice.
Yeah, well, generally that kind of internal dialogue is usually spoken to you in your own voice. But I guess the we're looking at one of a number of possibilities with this kind of thing, especially for Sheri's situation. Now, is this her own personal intuition that's manifesting in a little more impersonal fashion, almost to where it seems like it's not coming from her,
or is it that girl that killed herself,
or is it in an outside force, whether that be some guardian spirit or angel or what have you. But I guess the more poignant topic that to take from it is the idea of the premonition, because this not only, I mean, we've all been in situations where you're walking down a pathway and there's a group of shady looking people, and you're like, your internal voice is saying, take the long way, man, turn around and take the long way home. You don't need whatever trouble,
or cross the street or something,
or something like that. But in this instance, we're not even talking about that. It's one thing to have a stranger show up at your door and ask for help. I mean, that's like rapist 101 trick,
yeah,
kind of thing. Oh, my car broke down. Man, are you at home alone, little girl?
Would you like a balloon?
Yeah.
Do they float? Oh, so they float. And when you're down here with me. Yeah.
There's a whole yes, Pennywise, we get it. So there's that, right? I mean, we've all had, I'm sure at one point or a time or another, had a situation similar to that. But the idea that you're sitting there with a group of people and all of a sudden you're this conversation. You're going from person to person to person. There's almost this build up, oh my God, this conversation is going to get to me. And then this voice says, well, you can say what you're supposed to say, or you can say something completely different, and it'll change your life forever. Now, I mean that goes beyond
Yeah, that's something different entirely. That's a whole
right.
different animal.
And the thing that really stuck out with me was, she tells it in the same vein as, yeah, and this has been the voice that's been accompanying me throughout my life and giving me all this good advice about do this, don't do that, wake up, get the hell out of here, run, don't let this guy in. And then all of a sudden it pops this little doozy out. That's outside of the theme, I guess, of the rest of the situations, because it's basically it's foretelling the future. There's something about her in this situation. She was able to foresee this conversation and foresee what she was supposed to say, or forehear, I guess. So I guess one of the questions that it forces you to ask yourself, do you believe in the inevitability of, this is your destiny, or this is your predestined future? If things are predestined.
Well, that is a really interesting topic that can be its own podcast. And you know what? It's scary, and I don't even know what I think about it, because everybody who dies and comes back says time don't exist. Everything is pre-written, right? And our bodies, like when we come into our bodies, I mean, and this goes right back to Greek mythology. You drink from Lethe River, and now you got amnesia, right, in your body, and you're going to be reincarnated. The whole idea being that you come back here, you're given amnesia, you don't remember anything. And that's the only way that you can really live these new lives and trials and learn from it. Because everybody who dies, all of a sudden they say, bang. It's like they know every life they've ever lived. They know everything. All of a sudden, all this crazy information is like, it was like, it just floods on them like they always knew it. But when they come back into their body, it's like it's gone. That's why a lot of stuff that people experience, near-death experiences, they can't actually bring it back, because like they can't retain it. It's like it's locked out of this current body. But yet we have these certain people, these kids who have been able to retell like their past lives, like and their parents have actually taken them to different countries, and they've been able to like say where they work, what it looked like, things that the kids had no idea, should have no idea about. Like there's just no way that they could know. So, how is that possible? Right? I mean, we've seen them on TV. I've seen so many people, be able to describe like how they died and where it was to, and like, and find these places and evidence of it in their current life. Right? I mean,
well, there's actual recorded murder convictions that have come out from a little kid taking his parents to where he used to live when he was an old man, and pointing at the guy who killed him. And and I guess it was the guilt of the situation. This kid just calls this old guy out on the spot and says, you killed me and you buried me back here. And the guy just breaks down and admits to the whole thing, and admits to it to the cops. And sure enough, there was an old guy that had lived next door to this guy, and he had just disappeared. And they go and they, dig up a spot under a wood pile or something. And sure enough, here's the body of this guy. I think that's how it went. So yeah. There has been there's definitely been situations like that.
So I
go ahead.
Well, my point was, that being the case, and amnesia being a real thing that we get when we're born here, and a real idea that we've lived many lives and will live many more and all that. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there to reinforce that notion. And that being the case, and time only being existing when we're here, everyone who's dead says time is not a thing. It ceases to exist. Well, then you know what? Everything is predetermined. All the choices that you make. I mean, and it's hard to say that, right? Because we feel like we have free will. We feel like we're making choices. But really, when you think about it, given I mean, everything is based on your personality, your experience. Like, I mean, you take me, right? My personality, and based on like my life experiences, you put me in a certain situation, and I'm gonna make a choice, and I'm probably always gonna make that same choice because that's where I'm gonna lean. Based on
And just because I know you, if somebody would say, give me that hypothetical situation and say, how would he react? Well, it's not that I necessarily know the future, but I could probably 9 out of 10 times say, this is how he would react.
right, and so
Just because I know you so well, that would be just a case of knowing your personality and knowing the things that you've gone through in your life.
exactly. So that being the case, knowing that would be how it would work almost every single time, then are we really making choices, or do we just feel like we are? Right?
Well, and from the metaphysical, this theme extends all the way into the into science. There is a very strongly held or widely held belief that we live in a three spatial dimensional universe and one temporal dimensional universe. Now, if we were able to enter a universe that had two temporal dimensions, right? Because right now we're stuck in one temporal dimension. We're constantly moving in one direction through this thing we call time. If we were able to exist in two temporal dimensions, we could go back and forth. And what would that mean? Like that's a very difficult thing to wrap your head around. That would mean that you're always being born, you're always going to school for the first time, you're always getting married, you're always having your first child, and you're always dying.
Well, the way
you can visit any, if you lived in a two temporal dimensional universe, you could travel back and forth along that timeline at will. The same as no different than physically walking from one end of a hallway to the other. So again, that begs the question: are our lives predetermined, and do the existence of premonition, or does the existence of premonition kind of lead some credence to that? If Sheri was able to, that she obviously had some foreknowledge of this experience. And I mean, regardless of the fact that there seemed to be, because personally, I think that in her situation, there's an outside narrator.
well, maybe it's her from a previous life, right? Like
or further along the timeline.
Yeah, because I mean, in near-death experiencers, people who have said that that time itself isn't a thing. Like it's just it always was, always will be. It's linear. The way they describe it is that like there's one guy, right? I was reading this one guy's near-death experience, and he said he went right back to the beginning of time, and he traveled right to the end, and it's linear. It's like a big long movie. Everything that happened, depending on where you are, you could say it's happened or it hasn't happened yet, but in reality, it all exists at once. Everything.
So it's not that time, quote unquote, doesn't exist so much as that it has deeper dimensions to it than just what we experience here. We're not just stuck in the river of time, being pulled along down the current. We are here, but elsewhere, and maybe in another dimension or in a different configuration, when we're not stuck in a flesh and blood body. It's not linear. Well, I mean, it's linear in the way that it's a straight line, perhaps. But we could traverse it back and forth at our will. He, like you said, he was able to trace the river of time right back to its source, right to the beginning.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to look at destiny, right? I mean, the idea that we're given a destiny or we make our own. Well, I mean, there's also something to be said for the people, and these are people, like I keep referencing this stuff only because I'm reading it so much lately, but like they would speak to God or Jesus or whatever when they were dead, or just some kind of, somebody knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than us, right? And they would be told that, we pick our lives and our trials and our burdens and everything before we ever come to Earth. But the whole idea being that, we experience these things to grow, to learn. Because it's kind of like, say if you picked, one of your trials to be in a wheelchair, right? Well, you and we could say we have empathy and sympathy for people who have that hardship, right? But we can't truly understand what it's like unless we lived it, right? And the only way to do that, you have to pick that trial and come down here and live it. And the only way to really understand it and get the perspective, you'd have to have amnesia. You wouldn't have to come down here and say, okay, well, this is my mission and I'm going to go to a better place. You have to come down here and, like everybody else, you don't know what's going to happen, you're not really given any comfort, or, you know what I mean? Like, you have to come down here absolutely in the dark and just deal with it.
Yeah.
To get that perspective.
Well, I guess not to stray too far into that topic, since we're going to nail it later on next week, I guess the question more so being, was it really even an option for her to say something different in that situation? Or the fact that she said it in the future, and she had, had a premonition of herself seeing it in the future. That obviously meant that it had happened, right?
Okay.
Which means that if that's the case, then and if time is this always existing dimension, where in perhaps in a different situation we can travel the river of time up and down, and experience any moment along the timeline that we choose. Is anything really changeable? Is anything really mutable? Was she able, though it gave her the option, did Sheri really have a choice? Or the fact that she had already said it, even though she had knowledge that she had already said it, does that change the fact that it had been said in the future? The ripples of that experience travel back into the past, meaning that she has to make that same, or say that same thing again. Well, are we able to even if you were able to travel back in time, could you do anything different? And I think at least the theoretical science on the matter is pretty sure the answer is no. Actually, that things are the way they are, which really, I'm dwelling on this part of the story because to me, all the intuition things aside, this really points out a unique situation where, you have an opportunity to change your future, no matter how small of a change it might be. Is there really a choice if that, or are things already set in stone, things that were set in motion, at the Big Bang, and then that's it? Everything is playing out now the way it has to play out, because that's the way that the dice were rolled back at the creation of time. And at least from a scientific perspective, it certainly looks that way. And at least in this instance, she said exactly what she was supposed to say. So was there ever a choice, I guess?
Well, I don't know. What if, like, how we got the multiple universe theory, right? And every time you make a decision, another universe splits off and you made the other one, right?
Well, there's the many worlds theory. And then there's the I can't remember what they call that one, but that one's slightly different. And the idea that an entire, now, personally, I think that's a very idealized kind of theory that unlike the many worlds theory, that one holds a little less water when it comes to the actual the actual theoretical principles.
Well, as long as we're being theoretical, I mean, we're just spitballing, right?
Oh, of course.
So, what about the idea that, okay, everything already happened, right? Every which way, everything has already happened. So, we're down to Sheri making this choice, right? She can change where she's going to go. Maybe your consciousness can only exist in one of these places at a time. And by making a certain choice, you split off from that world and you enter this other one, but it all technically exists, but your consciousness can only exist in one of these worlds at a time.
Well, I guess the key thing with the many worlds theory is that it would allow for an infinite number of universes to exist, which would mean not that you make a decision and that causes the universe to split into two universes. It's that because there's an infinite number of universes out there, there's a universe where you made that decision instead. The universe doesn't exist because you made the decision, but the decision was made differently in this other universe because that universe already existed. And, each of these other universes, whether you're there or it doesn't matter how many other universes you exist in, they each would have their own individual Will Pender, and each Will Pender would have his own consciousness, that they're all, and it doesn't make that Will Pender any more you, because it's a different universe. He's made of different molecules. I mean, it's the same thing as twins. I mean, they're genetically identical and brought up in very similar environments, but they are clearly and distinctly two different individuals. So I think with the many worlds interpretation, at least, and I mean, it's an interpretation that existed in theology and tradition and metaphysics long before theoretical physics ever came around. It took thousands of years for science to kind of catch up with tradition on that one. So I mean, I very strongly feel that the many worlds interpretation is kind of the way it actually goes. And maybe like you said, it's not so much that these universes split off from one another, but you're just there making different decisions on certain things. And because it's an infinite array of universes, then there's an infinite combination of decisions that you're making or not making, as the case might be.
Well, it really can spiral in a lot of different ways. So, to the audience, I ask you, what do you think the voice was? Was it Sheri's intuition? Was it her guardian angel? Was it her from another universe? What do you think it was? And with that having been said, I hope you enjoyed the story. And if you have an effed up story of your own, we would like to get it. You can send it to us at effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We'll get it on the website, and we will get it into a podcast. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed the show. I will catch you next time.
Thank you very much for listening, and have a great night.